Hi, 8th graders. Welcome back. This is lesson 2 of Module 7, Solve Systems by Graphing. The I can statement says, I can solve a system of linear equations by graphing and check that my solution is correct. So let's look at the Spark Your Learning. Wes is laying out model train tracks along equations on a coordinate grid and wants to know if there is a place where the two trains might collide. Determine whether there is any such place and explain your reasoning. So if we look over here at the tools, there's a table, they have a coordinate graph, possibly a straight edge or ruler, and a pencil. So here's the table that he's using. These are the equations that he's going to look at. So go ahead and do that. Take some time, work on that. You can also look at the turn and talk. How can you check that you correctly determined any possible places where the trains might collide? So that's kind of, it goes along with this. So take a minute, work on that, and then we can go to the build understanding. So now if we look at build understanding, it says Gabriella is using a coordinate plane to design a race course for remote control cars. She wants to use straight sections laid out according to the equations in the table. So here's her table. And if you notice, these are all in the y equals mx plus b format. So that'll help you. She needs to know where the cars might collide, if anywhere. So in A, they just want you to graph these equations on this coordinate plane. B, they ask what method did you use to graph the lines? So might be different answers for different people, just depends on how you graph those two lines. So that'll be B. And then C, did you draw a point of intersection on the graph? Does that mean the cars will or will not collide? And explain. So different sized graphs will show different things. So one thing with this, you may want to look at what are the lines like, what are the slopes, what's the y-intercept. Look at all those different things, and even if maybe they didn't intersect on your graph the way you drew it, maybe they will eventually if they're extended on. So think about that. D, are the lines you graphed parallel? And how would you know that? Think again about what they talked about in previous lessons about how you know if lines are parallel or not given an equation. And then E, what does this tell you about the two lines? So they're asking according to D whether they're parallel or not. What does that tell you? And then F, what can you do to graph the lines differently so that you can see the point of intersection? So there they are saying if there is a point of intersection but it doesn't show up on your graph, what could you do differently to draw the graph differently, to graph the lines in a different way so that you might see that point of intersection. So pause the video here and work on this one, and then we'll go to the next section. So here on this next page, this is a continuation from the last problem. So G, they ask you to graph and label the same equations, Gabriella's equations, on the grid here so that the so that the point of intersection of the lines is shown. Draw the X and Y axis and indicate the scale of your graph. So here they're just kind of giving you free rein. You can draw the grid however you want. You can draw the scale, make the scale what you want it to be able to show a point of intersection. And then H, at what point do the cars have the potential to collide and why? How would you know that from your graph? I, compare your graph with those of other students. Did everyone make the same choices and see the point of intersection? So if you are not able to do that, if you're working at home on your own, you could draw another graph maybe on graph paper to see if you used a different scale or a different size graph, if it looks different, and if you see a point of intersection then. J, is it possible that there is more than one point of intersection? And then explain your reasoning for your answer. K, show how you can use the coordinates of the intersection point and the given equations to check that you've found the correct point. So this one, do the best you can on that one and see if you can come up with the right way to show that. Then go ahead and do the turn and talk. How can you tell just by looking at two given equations whether they must have a point of intersection or not? So I would encourage you to do that as well. So pause there, and then we can look at the step it out. So now that you finished the build understanding, let's take a look at the step it out. So number 2, it says, when you graph a system of linear equations, the point of intersection of the lines, if any, is the solution of the system. So here I have two equations. That would be called a system of equations. That's two or more equations that contain two or more variables. So I would write these down because they're going to reference these things. Hopefully you have a math journal that you're using, but they're going to reference these later on in future lessons. So it'd be good to have those handy so you don't have to keep flipping back. If you have your journal, you can just look it up. So here's this system of equations. Graph and label each equation on the coordinate plane. So you want to graph both of these lines. And again, these are in the y equals mx plus b format. So you know the m is the slope, b is the y-intercept. So graph those here. Estimate in B the solution to the system of equations. And once you get that graph, you'll be able to see how you would estimate that, what the system or the solution would be. C, why is it difficult to determine the point of intersection from your graph directly? Sometimes you might be able to tell exactly if it's a really precise graph, but why might it be difficult to determine the point of intersection? D, a student claimed that the point of intersection of the lines is 1/4, 3.5. Is that student correct, and how do you know? So answer D, and then once you can pause, finish the step it out, and then you can go on to the check understanding and complete that, and then we'll go on to the next section. Here's the on your own. So if you did well on the check understanding and you feel like you have a good grasp of this, go ahead and work on this on your own. And then this homework page is optional unless you feel like you need a little more practice. But if you feel like you've got it down and you're doing great, then just go ahead and do the test prep and the spiral review, and you'll be finished with this lesson, and we'll see you in lesson 3.